Hi, everybody. Welcome to another CTO Craft Bytes. This is the first one after the summer break as well, so welcome back, everybody. Today, we are going to look at how to stop hiring your way out of problems. If this is your first time at a CTO Craft Bytes event, let me just tell you a little bit more about the group. CTO Craft is a mentoring and coaching community for technology leaders all around the world, focused on supporting technologists and their leadership growth. Community members are now over 7,000, and CTO Craft provides them with one-to-one coaching, mentoring groups, a curated Slack community, and events just like this one. Big thanks today to the headline partner AWS for help making the events, the Bytes events possible. I'm Emma Hopkinson-Spark. I'm Chief of Staff at 101 Ways, which is a technology consultancy, and I'm going to be hosting today for you a fireside chat with Hywel. Do you want to give us a quick intro, Hal, too?
Yeah, so hello, first of all, Emma. I am the co-founder and CEO of Skillaware. We are a SaaS company that we help develop developers through something we call targeted capability training. That's coaching that's personalized to each individual's needs. It's led live by experts and taught through hands-on, challenging coding exercises in small groups. Before doing that, I've been a CTO for a variety of VC-backed companies for the last 10 years or so. I ran the tech leader dinners before the pandemic started, and hopefully going to get those going again soon. And I've done a bunch of CTO coaching as well. And I'm also a published curriculum author. I occasionally blog, and I also host a podcast called Primarily Context Based in conjunction with CTO Craft.
Excellent. So before we finish today, we're going to send out contact details for Hal and myself. So any of those things that Hal's just mentioned, I'm sure we'll be able to connect and get more information on that too. Just a little bit of chat about where we are right now. So if you look at your Crowdcast window, over on the right, you'll start to see a few people already in the chat window. That's just chat between yourselves, and we can see it too. And by all means, jump in there and make comments and chat to one another as we go. The other thing you see down the bottom is one that says ask a question. So as we chat through this next, 50 minutes or so now, if there's anything you specifically want to ask or for us to start to lean the conversation towards, then pop it in there and I will ask that for you, and we can answer your questions directly. So jumping in, we had a little chat already the other day when we were talking about this, and I think the title is really interesting, but maybe a little bit vague. And what does that actually mean then? And where does that come from? So yes, tell us a bit more then. What do you mean when we say that we should stop hiring our way out of problems?
I think that the headline of it is that I think that hiring is very often feels like the only resort. And I think it should be the last resort. So I find hiring very frustrating in lots of ways. I hate the slowness of it, that you decide you want to hire someone to the team. Maybe you take 3 months to actually find someone, you wait a 3-month notice period, and then it's another 3 months before they're kind of up and running enough to have paid off the time that you've put in. That means it's also really expensive as well. It's generally painful with lots of false starts along the way and things that don't work out. And in general, it's just a pain. I would definitely prefer not to hire if I could. And I think in general, most companies already have great talent, and they would like to make those people more talented. That's what we hear a lot. And I think that can be a real alternative to hiring. That means that you can, instead of importing skills already in someone's brain by hiring them, you can import skills by injecting them into the very willing, typically brains, of the people that you already have. And this is something that I kept seeing in the years before starting Skillaware, was that I would see all these teams where it felt like learning would have solved so many problems. It's the kind of silver bullet that there was a team of the data scientists who wrote poor quality Python, and then the one production Python writer who was the bottleneck for the whole team, incredibly stressed by the whole thing. And the only way that team could see to resolve that problem was to hire more senior Python people or experienced Python people, or people who were allowed to write production quality Python, rather than changing the Python that the fleet of machine learning developers were writing. Or the team that had a load of PHP and React developers, but didn't have anyone who could write React Native, which meant that when the existing React Native developers left, we were left with a huge hole in that team that we could only fill by hiring, or so we thought. And that hiring process took, I I think we were looking for 4 or 5 months before we just gave up on hiring altogether as a way of solving that problem, because everyone who we saw at the time, React Native was extremely hot property, if you knew it. And so that meant that everyone who we were looking at would get snapped up by a bigger company that could pay us more. And that was all wasted effort after a very slow and annoying process. So in general, go on.
And so in that 4 or 5 months that it took to hire somebody, I guess your point is that they could have learnt it by then.
Yeah, exactly. They would have been happier because they would have liked to learn it. They would have been able to be truly full stack across everything the company was developing. And I think it would have been a much better result for the team, because quite often you're in those situations where what you need is incremental. Like if what you need is capacity, I think that's maybe the only time when hiring is the only way. You can often increase the capacity of your existing people. So we've seen cases where people increase their velocity by a factor of 4 by essentially training enabled change in the team. But that still is going to reach a limit at some point, and then you might need to hire. If what you're looking for is skills and capability, I feel like hiring should be the last thing on the list.
See, this is where we probably disagree on some things, which I love, and I'm not going to tiptoe around it. And hopefully it's engaging them for the audience to watch us argue about some things. But the counter to that, and obviously I'm coming from a position where we're a consultancy and we get asked for the same things, capacity versus capability. Now, our answer to that is we absolutely want to help you increase the capability of the people in your team. But we've found that the quickest way to do that is to go and put really experienced people right with those engineers or whoever it is that you're trying to upskill, and pair with them and mentor them and show them what good looks like. Do you not find it quite a challenge, I guess, from a training perspective to I guess teach people cold, or don't they not learn best on the job? I don't think we completely disagree, but it feels slightly at odds, I guess, from my experience as well, and I imagine probably at odds from some of the experience of the people in the audience too.
Yeah, and I, like you, I am keen to lean into the disagreement. I think one of the things you get with any form of pair programming is that you're inherently limited by the set of skills that those people have, which can be big, right? It can be that what you have is your pair program with someone who is, just incredibly expert at the technology and a good teacher at communicating it. That I think is not always the case. I feel like that's probably rare. I think learning by osmosis is also necessarily going to be a bit haphazard, in that it's going to be the things that come up. And one of the things that we see as our job is preparing people for the things that they haven't seen yet, giving people access to things that they didn't know that they didn't know, that they don't know to go and Google. And I think one of the benefits of bringing in outsourced people to do that kind of pair programming approach and sitting with the team and working with them, one of the benefits is it's going to be very contextual to what the company is working on and the work that's being done this week or whatever. I think one of the benefits that a structured formal training program can bring is the kind of higher level view across all aspects of a technology potentially, not just what's needed for this week, and also that we can get more abstractly contextual. So there's a part of the context which is we're solving this problem this week, and then there's also a part of context which is if we were solving problems X, Y, and Z, which would be the best way to solve that in those 3 scenarios. And I think good formal training brings that out and says, in this occasion we should use this thing, and in this occasion we should use that thing. Whereas I think it's very difficult. I think it's very rare to find developers who you can sit down and work with who can do the same thing, who can say, the reason I'm doing it this way this time is because of this context. And actually, now I think about it, if things had been different, I would have done it this other way.
Right. Yeah. I think that something about that abstraction, which is good and bad, right? Because it's like you're saying, so it's opening your eyes to stuff that you don't know. But I guess it's how embedded can that really be if it's not contextualized and it's not on the job, because it's doing it that really helps bake in those skills. If they've read it from the book, or they've seen it on a whiteboard, or they've done an exercise somewhere a few months back on a training course, are they really learning that? I'm just going to push the challenge.
Yeah. So I think there are a few different examples in what you said there. So there's the kind of passive of like watch a video, look at something on a whiteboard, And passive learning generally gets you as far as being able to recall and recognize new ideas, but probably not to apply them in context and to kind of to justify them and to create things with them. I think learning by doing is proven to work. I think the nature of it matters a lot. So in the pair programming scenario, if there is a person who is watching over your shoulder and kind of guiding you while you do something, that's actually roughly how our training sessions work. So we will tell you about a new topic, and in the training session, you then go and write some code using that idea, but having to apply it in a new context using your brain. And that happens kind of 5 or 6 times over the course of the training session. So I think in both cases, what happens is someone is learning by applying. What that gives you is the kind of elevation beyond mere recall and recognition of ideas, but application and the ability to create something new with the skills that you're talking about. What goes beyond that is evaluating and analyzing. So the idea that not only can I do this thing, but I can also tell you the context that made this thing the right solution. And that, I think, is something that formal training provides, because it's abstracted, because we're not talking about solving the problem that the company needs us to do this week, but we can say, here are 3 ways of solving this general kind of problem and the different scenarios when each makes sense. And now you're going to do each of those yourself, so that you come out of this able to kind of pattern match what you need to do in your work to one of those scenarios. I think part of the problem is that the vast majority of what we call training is passive and isn't effective and doesn't try and aim high with their outcomes and the kind of effectiveness.
Isn't it? That's what people think of when I think of training. I think of being sat in a classroom, or sat watching videos, or watching somebody else do it, or I think of it as not working for a few days when I think of training.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Well, like, the best thing about the training course is the free tea and coffee at the back.
It's not always good.
It's a real shame. Well, true, but at least it's free. I think that.
No,
go on. Yeah. I think that we should aim higher with training. Honestly, I think the vast majority of training is the kind of passive online watching videos bucket, which is great for giving people that kind of horizon broadening experience. You know, I want to know about Haskell, even though it's got no use to my work. I'm interested in how ownership of variables works in Rust. Those things are excellent for videos, because they increase your awareness and they can just pique your interest in something. In terms of skills, which is what we as leaders typically want, that's not really enough. We need people who can create. And the typical way that we kind of culturally try and give people skills is through classroom-based training, which has all of these problems in that it's typically kind of very fixed in its scope. It'll be 3 days for intermediate Python developers, whatever that means. And I think we'll probably talk about my feelings about that kind of bucketing approach later. And it will cover these set of topics, and it will be 3, maybe 7-hour days back to back. And it has all of these benefits in that it can be hands-on and you can ask questions of an expert, and all of these downsides in that you learn something in hour 2 that's incredibly useful to you. And then you've got another, 19 hours to go of training course before you can go back to your work and apply that, which is really what you want to be doing before hour 3 begins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It must be really relevant as well now. I mean, everyone I speak to is struggling to hire. Everyone, every CTO you speak to, every client we speak to, everyone is struggling to bring people into their teams. Everyone feels that they need to and have massive gaps in their team. So it must be more relevant than ever. And there must be people, I'm sure, in the audience right now that are having that pain as well. So anybody that does have any specific questions, then do jump on the questions at the bottom and let us know. But I guess what are you seeing then? There must be use cases where it really works, and there must be use cases where maybe it doesn't as well, and it's not the route to go. What are you seeing right now as far as a trend?
So we're seeing what you're talking about, that hiring is getting a lot harder, and that's driving a lot of people to look at their existing teams as the source of improvement. I think as people become more and more remote, there's also a challenge about, your most new to engineering engineers are not able to just turn around and ask a question in the office anymore. And that's seeming like a permanent state of affairs. So now that people have adjusted to that new reality, there is now a need for a way of establishing that baseline and leveling up where previously it used to be people kind of gathering around a table or gathering in a room and being able to ask each other questions or say, hey, can you just pop over and look at my screen for a second? In terms of the use cases we see, they really divide into two categories. There's, on the one hand, there's a kind of optimization argument. I've got a team that's using this stack of technologies, and everything would be better if my team were 10% better at them. That would mean that we were shipping faster, the sales team were happier, the company was making more money, there were fewer bugs in production, which meant that our customers would recommend us more, and then we'd make more money, and everything would be good. And then the other is the kind of the technology driven one, where we've decided to adopt a new part of the stack, we're adopting a new technology, probably for the same reasons. We want to go faster, it will enable all these other things for us as a business. And now what we need is a way of bringing that technology skill into everyone that we've already got in the team. So we're working with two companies actually in the last few weeks, which are adopting Golang for that reason. One, because the company's just been acquired by Uber, and they need to rewrite their stack into Golang. And the other is a more kind of strategic decision to help with hiring and to help with the kind of the community around the language, because they're coming from a much less popular language, and so adopting Golang for them has all of these other benefits. And so a way of adopting that with the people that they already have without losing productivity, I think is the kind of driver for them.
Okay. And does it really not lose productivity? Because it feels, I guess you think of, but again, I'm still wearing my hat in terms of, my direct experience of bringing people in similar kind of solving similar problems, but in a different way, is that's one of the reasons that clients come to us, is that they know they need to get better. They don't want to slow down. So having an extra injection of people that can upskill people and get the job done at the same time accelerates things rather than slows it down. Does training really not slow things down?
I think it depends how you're training, right? So if what you're doing is sending the team out for 3 days on a course, I think that does slow things down. I think if what you're doing is giving people like a subscription to a video library, that tends not to slow things down, but you also see generally quite low usage of the library, low engagement. I think, so I can talk about the way we work, but I think it's important to realize you could absolutely go and implement this yourselves in your teams.
Yeah.
So what I think makes for effective training is to firstly understand very specifically which things you want to train in. So for us, we look at the level of roughly an hour of someone's time, and we divide up a kind of a topic, a language like Python, say Kubernetes, into 1 hour chunks of things that you would need to learn. And again, this is something that you can absolutely do for yourself. Then you need to work out which of those are relevant to each person. Once you've done that, you can then run these kind of hands-on sessions that are specifically at building up the skill around each one of those chunks. So let's say list comprehensions in Python. If we've identified that these 5 people on the team don't know about list comprehensions in Python, and that's important to me for what that team is working on, then we should run a session on list comprehensions in Python, which gives them problems to solve, has them doing it supervised by someone who already has a really good understanding of that topic, so that they come out knowing that. That's what we do as a company, but it's also something you can go and do. And that form of training,
small and digestible, I guess, rather than it being a big overhead.
And about it being personalized, because this is the other way that you can really kill people's enthusiasm for training, is to just give everyone the same set of hours to run through. In which case, if that's all stuff that people on your team already know, that's not a good use of their time. It's not a good use of their time for the company, but it's also extremely demotivating and boring. That's the point where I am like spending as much time as possible at the back of the room, just necking coffee and eating chocolate digestives.
Yes, I've been on those training courses too. There is a question in from the audience looking at, I guess the question is around introverted technologists and how you get that kind of engagement of the training. Is there a difference, or how you tailor that really?
So my experience has always been that introverts still ask questions. They might just not want to be kind of exposed as the person asking the question, and so you need ways of enabling that. I mean, in this, for example, the person who asked the question, you can see who they are, which might mean that introverts don't want to ask a question here. If you give people ways of asking questions or getting stuck and receiving feedback that doesn't identify them, then I think it's pretty introvert friendly. So I can speak with confidence and say that when we train, we can talk about, someone has made this mistake, and if you've done the same thing, here's how you need to fix it, without necessarily saying, Hywel has a bug on line 7 and he doesn't know how to use a semicolon or whatever.
Right. Okay. And one of the things that when we were speaking the other day that really stuck in my head is the phrasing that you used. I think it was really cool. You were talking about how most people see themselves as malleable, but that's not how we treat people. I think it's an interesting phrase. Can you just expand on that a bit more or show it for everyone else?
I think most tech leaders I interact with and see in communities, share articles and talk about insightful things that they've read and think about themselves as changing and growing and learning. I mean, and clearly they do, right? The existence of the CTO Craft mentoring circles is a great example of the fact that people can learn and grow and gain new skills. And yet when we think about our teams and the skills in those people, we essentially think of them as very, very slowly growing, and that growth being quite undirected and haphazard. And I think if we applied the same logic about ourselves to our teams, I suspect we would be doing much more formal learning, much more kind of target-focused learning, rather than the standard approach, which is you put someone in a job and after 3 years you change the word at the front of their job title from junior to mid-level to senior.
Which leads on to another interesting point that I think we picked up on. And again, one of the phrases that you used was that experience isn't a proxy for skills, that it's not just about how long somebody has been doing something. So that's obviously, when you use words like that, that's obviously for some personal pain or experience, or that you've seen that. What do you see with that then?
I guess I also think it's intuitive. So it's always one of my frustrations when I see people's interview questions that they're using in interviews, and they're very experience based. They're very much based around, tell me about a time when you have done something, or we want people who've got 6 years experience in teams like this. I think because experience doesn't transfer, it doesn't prove skill, it doesn't predict the future. That's the thing. Experience as a proxy for skill doesn't work. Like, a skill is not uniquely defined by experience. If I've solved this problem in, I don't know, a bank versus in the IT department for my local council versus in the early days of Google, that experience might be described in the same way, but the skills that were required to do it might be vastly different every time. On the flip side, I think people have skills that they might not have experience of. So I would imagine that people who have been in leadership roles in their life, maybe, you've run a band, you've had to you've run a team or something, like a football team. I suspect those people have some skills towards being a team lead in a company, even if they don't have the experience of being a team lead in their past roles. And so when you say you want someone who has been a team lead, there are potentially good candidates who you're excluding. Whereas when you think about it in terms of skills, someone who has leadership abilities, someone who can, make tough decisions, who can inspire people, whatever it is that you're looking for from that person, then I think you can change how you think about hiring. And those questions stop being about, tell me about a time when you have, and they start being about, how would you do this thing? Which is then lets you simulate the work more and means that your hiring process is going to be more accurate.
So how do you communicate or measure or quantify the skill then? Because there's something, you can see why people fall to you want someone with 5 years experience or 10 years experience or whatever, because it's a number and it's measurable and it's tangible and it's evidential and it's there. For someone to just say, oh yeah, I've got leadership skills. Okay, so you have you or have you not? How do you communicate that then? If you're talking about, rather than experience and more about skills, how do people talk about that then?
I think for you as a person talking about it when applying to a job, I think talking about 5 years of experience is great. I think talking about giving references where people have said things that you've done is great, because at that point, experience is what you have. It's really on the other side, when making the hire, we shouldn't be relying on experience. We shouldn't be looking down a kind of list of past experience and saying, well, I see that you've led a team in these scenarios, therefore I'm going to assume you can lead a team here. If what we need from leading a team is these 5 expectations from the person, then we should be measuring for those expectations as part of our interview process. What that gives you is the ability to make the right compromises. So right now, typically, when we hire, we have to look for a whole load of things, including skills for the job, but also things like cultural fit and, the person's attitude, say, is right for how the organization thinks. This person doesn't hate testing and we love automated testing, say. What people do now sometimes is relax on aspects of the cultural fit or aspects that can't be learned in favor of people having the ones that can be learned. The fact that you already have this kind of set of criteria that matches what I'm looking for means that all of the kind of softer, fluffier things I'm going to have to overlook, because you've got 5 years of experience, and that's what we said on the job ad. So I can't say that you don't have that. Therefore, you seem like a good fit for this role. Mm. If instead you think in terms of the kind of the harder ones to change, which I think typically can come down to kind of interpersonal or cultural things, and then think about the other ones as things that are more malleable and changeable, then when you're hiring someone, you can say, well, parts of this person's role as a tech lead, they're already meeting, because when we asked them to do this, they did really well at that. When we asked them to do that, they were quite good. And what that means is you can see how much work is required to help train that person in the areas they're weak on. If you just think of it as this very broad, they've got some experience that matches the number of years that I'm asking for, then you're gonna get people who don't have the right skills, because experience doesn't become skills.
Yeah, we definitely see that when I've ever hired in the past, it's always like you say, the stuff that's maybe harder to learn or harder to influence that's what you really go for. Technical skills they can learn. It's more about actually, is this the right person, and have they got the right attitude, and are they going to be a good fit? So yes, definitely see that. What you're talking about there, though, is when you're bringing people into the organization and still in that hiring mode. And of course, what we're really talking about is how to stop doing that in the first place. Can you apply the same kind of logic and I guess skill leveling to existing people in your team as well? So everything you were speaking about then was about how you interview somebody when they're coming into an organization. But what about you've got your team, you haven't got the skills that you need, who's got the potential or not? What is the skill level in our team? Do the same logic apply, or is it a different way of assessing where you're at?
I think the same logic applies in that when you're looking at your team, you're not going to say, well, this person's worked in development for 2 years and this one's worked here for 4 years, so that 4-year person is more skilled. I think you would look at the things that they're writing and look at the feedback they get from peers, and I think people probably already wouldn't be using their time as a developer to try and be a proxy for skills. Right. I suspect we do it in hiring because it's easier there, because we don't have that relationship, we don't have that other kind of body of evidence that we can fall back on, and it's easier to look at a number of years than to assess skills. I think you can assess skills though. So I think if you are thinking about the skill needs of the team, what you can do is try and break down what those needs are on a very granular level. Not just I need someone who's good at Python, but I need someone who can structure a Python program, someone who understands these aspects of OOP. We need them to know about classes and subclasses and inheritance and multiple inheritance and methods and static methods and those things. And we need someone who understands these aspects of the language and knows about databases as well. When you can get granular enough, you'll be able to see not only which of your team have which of those skills, but also which of the difference between people in your team. So if you're sat there thinking, I wish everyone was like Emma, she's so brilliant at her role, and all these other people are here, the path to get those other people towards the skills Emma has is going to look like these granular bits of of knowledge that I have to fill in. And of course, I'm speaking from experience because this is how we work as a company. But again, there's nothing that stops you going and emulating that same process for yourself, taking your career development ladder, which hopefully is already your progression ladder, rather, that's already quite granular, and really making it specific. Which aspects of which technologies do we expect each individual to know really well, and therefore what bits do they need to learn to be meeting those expectations.
Okay, and how individual do you think that needs to be? As in, 3 people all sat together in a team might need very different skills, or might need to get stronger in very different areas. How you say you go very granular, is it really that granular, this individual? And in fact, if I can just tie it into one of the questions that's on the board as well, about cognitive science in the training, so different learning styles and methods. So you could have a team of people all with very different learning needs in the way that they're going to process information and the way that they're going to consume that information, but also very different skills that they need to tweak in different areas. That can get really granular really fast.
So I would start with the understanding of skills and then take it from there. That's going to be whether you want everyone to have exactly the same baseline and raise that, or whether you're happy with one person having each skill and not too worried about everyone else not having it, is going to depend on how your team is set up. If they're very collaborative and working together a lot, like they're collaborating before the first pull request is created, say, then you might decide it's all right for each individual to have a very, very different set of skills. And really what you need to do is make sure that one of those 3 people knows each thing, but it's okay for all 3 to not. That's also going to come down to personalities as well, I suspect. If they're good communicators and good at teaching each other, then that's going to help as well if the skills are like distributed among the team. As for the cognitive science, I think so. The idea of learning styles is actually often misunderstood. So it's often received as being, I am a visual learner, I am a text-based learner, I am a kinesthetic learner, and actually the evidence is that there is no one, like, you are not one of those things. Everyone learns better with a mixture at different times in different situations. And so if you want really effective learning, what you need to enable is for all of those things. You can't really assume that people are going to learn by listening in this one context. And you also can't assume that each individual is either a listener or a reader or a doer. Ultimately, we are all doers. That is how we learn best. But what happens before the doing, whether that's listening or reading, is going to vary by person. And so really what you want to do is enable both. Allow for someone to hear by listening, allow for someone to hear by reading, allow for someone to make their own notes while they're doing it. And then for all those people, make sure that they are then doing something constructive with it. And then hopefully after that, doing something interactive. So there's this framework for thinking about learning called ICAP, which tells you about learning styles that are in decreasing effectiveness. So at the end, the P is for passive learning, which is just sitting there absorbing content. The A is for active learning, which is like having some content and then doing something immediately with it, like highlighting, underlining, or like copying it out. And so that's kind of like learning by rote, I think, is an example of active learning. Then the constructive learning, which is about creating something with the thing that you've learned. So if you think about vocabulary, for example, when I was learning French at school, you learn better by writing it out, but you learn even better if you then start creating sentences with the bit of vocab that you're learning. And then interactive is the most effective. That adds a kind of human interaction element on top. So if you really want your learning to stick and result in new skills, then have people create stuff with it, and then have them discuss different ways they've solved the problem and the pros and cons of each. So yeah, ICAP is that sequence in reverse and is the standard name for the framework.
ICAP, okay. It might be worth just sticking a link in the chat. People might be interested in it too. There are a couple of questions coming up over in the right on the chat window. By all means, pop them into the Ask a Question. I will grab one because I do see it. but it's probably easier to see if it's down in the ask a question bit. So I haven't got my glasses on, so I'm going to lean really close now while I try and read it from the screen. It says, so this is somebody that's in a position where I think it sounds like they've outsourced some work to a different company or to a different team, and now need to try and bring those skills back in-house. I think what they're looking for are any tips or suggestions on how to get started. How would you approach that problem?
So I would start with the kind of collaboration that Emma was talking about earlier, having those people work really closely, and then I would try and fill in the gaps. So when people work closely, they will see in this context, this is how we solve that problem, and they will be able to imitate the person that they are learning from. Imitation gets you so far. So a nice little mnemonic to learn is imitate, assimilate, innovate. The idea that you start by imitating someone, then you kind of internalize the thing that you're imitating until it becomes something that you are totally capable of. And then the innovate is the kind of creation step that follows that. And I have, since learning that, which I learned from a jazz trumpeter, I have learned that there is also this also exists, I think it's jiu-jitsu, the martial art, that has these levels of mastery of shu, ha, and ri, which are essentially the same 3 steps. So anyway, that is an aside. I would say that start by having your people work together with the outsourced people so that imitation starts happening. And then once you think this assimilation of those skills is happening, try and inject some kind of top-down training to help find the gaps that still exist and find the holes in understanding, and to also broaden the kind of the different ideas that each person has. So if they've only seen this thing done in that scenario, it's totally possible that they won't know what to do in another scenario. They won't know that there's another alternative way to solve that problem that formal training should help to identify.
I think it's that diversity of thought of like how to solve a problem differently or how to look at it in a different way. That's one of the things we really see a lot of as well. You know, clients that are so close to the issue that all they see is actually this is massive amount of work and we need loads of people and it's going to take years. But coming in from a different angle sometimes and having someone that's seen it a different way, like in your instance, I guess a trainer, or for us maybe a consultant, is that, well, hang on a minute, actually let's look at it this way and try and do it differently. But teaching people that distance sometimes and that different way of thinking, that's quite hard to get people to go and think differently. And I guess from back to where we disagree maybe is that I think it's how you inject that into people. And I think that's really hard to teach somebody abstracted and then on the job have them apply that different way of thinking, rather than have somebody come in and just prompt them in the right direction. Sometimes are there skills and things that you think that are easier to learn than others? Technical skills, I totally get it, but there's different ways of thinking. Can you really teach that?
My headset chose that moment to die, but I think I heard most of what you said.
I guess it's I'm looking for what's easier to teach and what's not. I guess you were talking about the native React type example earlier on of what skills you need right now. But the more cognitive skills, like how to approach problems in a different way or how to think more laterally, or that's harder to actually teach. Are there things that you think are worth investing in training and sometimes you just need an expert, or how does it work?
So I use a kind of taxonomy of learning that I would divide into knowledge and skills and wisdom. Knowledge is essentially a series of facts. It's like data. It's stuff that it's like the vocabulary of French. It's like the flags of the world that you learn essentially by rote learning. That's the best way to learn knowledge. And included in that would be, this is the shape of the API call to fetch from a URL, say. Skills are how to do something. They're the kind of know-how. They're the ability to perform something, often in a way that you would struggle to describe how you do it. So I have a skill in like picking up a glass, and I, again, have successfully managed to not crush the glass with my hand, and I'm able to move it to my mouth. But I couldn't tell you exactly how I did each movement. I couldn't tell you what I was doing with my muscles. And then wisdom is like contextual decision making. And typically for wisdom, we've historically relied on either experience, or the way that wisdom gets passed down is like law and like law spelled L-O-R-E, not L-A-W, and like sayings and aphorisms. So like a stitch in time saves nine is essentially a piece of wisdom about preventing a problem early, because you'll be glad you did later. And you see that in software development as well. You'll see people describing when you should use inheritance and when you should use composition, and they'll make some argument, but it will boil down to a piece of law that is, in this scenario, use inheritance, in this scenario, use composition. And actually, this is part of the thinking behind our podcast, primarily context-based, is it's exactly about trying to find that wisdom, and rather than ask people what they did, ask them about the context that made what they did the right decision. And that I think is one way to communicate wisdom. I think you can teach those things. I think you just have to be very careful with how you do it, because you can create experiences for people. You can set people exercises that say, do this and then do that. Do you see the problem that we've got here by doing that? Don't create the sequel by just doing string formatting without any escaping. Now try typing this into the username field and hit submit. Do you see that we've now dropped the entire database? Like you can instill wisdom by creating experiences and essentially leading people up to the wisdom and having them experience it for themselves. And I think the same is true for some of the more abstract skills that you're talking about. I think the thing is you have to apply them. And applying abstract skills is hard. You have to be very careful with how you design learning if the skill that you want people to learn is necessarily abstract. I think it's still possible. I think the existence of the mentoring circles is a great example of this. That is essentially a very abstract skill, and yet we find ways of having people learn it. And so the trick with an abstract skill is to talk a lot about the abstract skill, but to make sure that people are able to apply concretely, and let people, as with any skill, let people try, make mistakes, and get feedback and improve.
I really like that distinction, wisdom and knowledge. I'm going to steal that, and I'm not even going to apologise for it. There are a couple of questions coming in as well. If one is very long, and I will read it in a minute, but one is much shorter, so I will go for that too. By the way, we have about 15 minutes left. Keep questions coming in. You can upvote on the questions as well as they do come in. This one says, what do we both think are the most frequent sources of inertia to learning within organizations?
Sources of inertia. So I have an engineering background, and to me, inertia means momentum. And so inertia can be very high or it can be low. So if you mean inertia as in like inability to move, I think that comes from an unwillingness to accept that we are all malleable and that we can make change. And I think, frankly, it also comes from the fact that the vast majority of training is not very effective, and so there's an unwillingness to adopt it. If what you mean is what's the source of people moving really fast, then it's the opposite. Teams with high inertia have seen the impact that training can have. Like we know of companies that having decreased their cycle time by a factor of 4, that have worked out the ROI of training versus alternatives is 6 times cheaper, that have seen that they can relax their technical hiring requirements because they can train people in the technical skills they need to have. And so in those companies, inertia is very high and stays that way.
I think I see it, and I'm reading it as is that how are they not started yet? What's stopping them from getting on with learning, specifically around learning in the organization? The only thing I would add to that, I guess, from my perspective as well, is I see an awful lot of companies that are so close to the problem, or are trying to run so fast that they haven't given themselves just the breathing space to step back and say, actually, maybe there's a different way of doing this, or it's like panic mode, and they can't just take a pause to say, we could do this a different way, or maybe we just need a different skill, or maybe we could do this. I think everyone's so busy is part of it, isn't it? Okay, there are a couple more coming in. Okay, the long one. Oh, and it's got a vote. There seems to be an assumption that having people with correct technical skills and enough of them will solve the problem. So it's basically a supply side solution. Do you have any demand side solutions to a problem? I guess turning off legacy systems so that you have less demand on a team, or improving process so that quality is improved and you have to have less things to less support work, less unplanned work. So yes, rather than just relying on the skills, I guess there's a lot more you could do as well, to make the work different rather than just the people different. Is that what I think we're saying?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, if there are ways of moving the goalposts to be where you need them to be, which is essentially what you're saying, I think, like,
yeah.
Rather than we need to keep everything the same and solve this problem, it's can we change what we're already doing to solve this problem? I do have experience of companies that have solved those things by training, by adopting a different technology or changing up their stack, which is not just about the what you've called a supply side solution, but is about trying to change up the status quo.
One of the things that cropped up, so you've spoken a couple of times about the mentor circles. It's worth calling people's attention to the bottom of the screen. You'll see, tell me about mentoring circles. If you are not already part of CTO Craft and you're interested in those, then you can click on that link and take you through to get more information as well. The mentor circle that I facilitate within CTO Craft, one of the questions and one of the topics that's come up for conversation just this week is around where they're struggling to hire and they've had gaps in the teams for a really long time. It's actually, how do we change the work? And people talking about what experience do people have with low code or no code solutions where they can actually get rid of a lot of the problems and just have the engineers focus on the real problems to solve, rather than legwork that maybe they don't have to do, whereas they may have just been doing it because they're assuming that it's still a job to be done, if that makes sense. So yeah, what about differently, say, changing technologies, where we should probably talk low code, no code? Is it going to change the profile of what engineering is in the future anyway?
All the low code and no code platforms I've seen and used, I have at some point wanted to drop down and write the code myself. I've hit a wall where what they've built, which is often great, can't go any further, and I basically need like a Lambda function that I can like type in to kind of wire up the last bits. And so I think there's a big opportunity for those platforms to get rid of some of the boilerplate parts of coding, but I don't think it's going to replace the industry. I think it's just going to make the industry's work only the interesting bits.
It'd be interesting to see what conversation we're having in a few years' time, won't it? And the face of things change too. A quick question again in the topic, where I think, just to clarify what you said around the difference between like knowledge and wisdom. Someone's asking, so it was knowledge is information, skills is activity, wisdom is contextual decision. Is that how you phrase it?
Yeah, skills is how to. Knowledge is data, essentially. Like, knowledge is stuff that you could find on Wikipedia. And then wisdom is like the ability to make contextual decisions, which we typically think of as being experience-based. So if you look up definitions of wisdom, they talk about experience-based. It's why we think of older people as wise traditionally. Not that I'm saying they aren't, but that because they have built up more experience, when they say, be careful of that person, they seem like a nasty piece of work. They have some wisdom that we don't, that they're applying.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes left if anybody else has any other questions. Do you have any particular tips or methods for people to get started? I just know there's going to be an awful lot of people on here that are struggling to hire. And I think they can probably start to recognize things that they could do as far as maybe changing the work, changing the job, making things so they either don't need as many skills or as many people, and those gaps don't matter. Where should people start? It feels like there's so much. The people that are struggling to hire and have those gaps, if they're going to do one thing in the next week or so, what could they do that would start to make a difference to them, do you think?
I think there's something about taking a step back, and I think this is really what that earlier question was getting at, is that as leaders, part of the job is to form a strategy before acting. So the realization that we need to be going faster in this area is the kind of first step of that. And if what you're doing is jumping to hiring, then take that step back and think, could I instead retire this old platform? Could I replace it with a more maintainable maybe no code, low code. What would be the payoff if I rewrote that as a series of Lambda functions, or rewrote it in a more modern language, or finally retired that bit of COBOL that we've had hanging around since the 90s. One of those options, I think, should be about improving the skills of your existing team. So if your conclusion is what we need is to adopt a new technology, we need to be using, I'm going to go with Golang, and we need to be using Golang for all of the benefits that would bring us, and we need to be adopting that now, then you have options beyond hiring. And those include bringing in, starting with like an outsourced solution to kind of get those skills, get the project moving, start building up the skills in the team, and then maybe complement that with training so that you can fill in those gaps, rather than just thinking, I need to hire, or I need to fully outsource this, or indeed just thinking I need to find a way of switching off that project. I think the part of the role of being a leader is the step back and the kind of consideration of all of the alternatives, and not jumping to a kind of the first one that comes to mind, which is what I think hiring can become.
So I'm interested in, you said the podcast that you're doing. Now I'm about to pop in the link into the chat window, social media links for yourself and myself, but it would be interesting to let people know a bit more about that podcast as well, because I think there's probably a few people that would be interested in that. So over in the right, you'll now see Hywel and myself on the Slack group. If you're not in the CTO Craft Slack group, do join us over there, and you can carry on the conversation as well. There's also email and LinkedIn and Twitter and things in there, so go do it. But if you do have any information on that podcast, I think people will probably be very interested in that as well, Hywel.
So the title really comes from Stack Overflow. So on Stack Overflow, if you ask a question that is too broad, one of the reasons that moderators can close the question is it's because it's primarily opinion based, because it has more than one right answer. And one of the things I saw while running the CTO/tech leader dinners that I ran is that very often the same questions come up with different answers, and that's a reason to discuss them rather than close them. And so the idea behind the podcast was to take one of those questions each time and talk about how the context affects the decision, because I think those are the most interesting questions. They're the ones that I want to kind of talk about. If there is only one right answer, then I think it's quite a boring question. And so in each podcast episode, we try and take a question that is relevant to CTOs and other tech leaders and talk about that question, and talk about answers, and talk about, crucially, the context that makes each of those answers either relevant or not. And so we've talked about things like, am I doing agile right? We've talked recently about diversity and how you should think about diversity. I think that was a particularly interesting one. We basically just try and talk about a variety of interesting topics and then contextualize them, because I think that kind of comes back.
The learning comes from, isn't it? It's that contextualization. That's where people are going to actually get something that's relevant to what they're doing, rather than just the theory of things.
Right. It's going beyond experience to talk about the why that made that experience either good or bad.
Okay. So we only have a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else, Hal, that you want to share with people? Any final thoughts or any advice? I don't see any more questions have come in anyway. The links are down there in the right. But yes, any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
There was one topic actually that came up in our chat before, which I've been thinking about a lot since. And I think you asked me, what about people who don't want to learn?
Yeah.
And I was
you
almost
thought about those people.
Yeah, I was really struck by it, and then I thought about it afterwards, and I realized I've never met someone who doesn't want to learn, but I have met people who really hate training. So I think people sometimes don't want to learn a specific topic. So if you said it's really important before this, before the CTO Craft Bytes session, that you learn PHP, that language is not for me, and I probably wouldn't have wanted to learn it, whatever it enabled. I think people often don't want to sit through things that they already know. Yeah, I think people really hate training. It's unfortunately a poisoned word, because so much of training is not personalized to each person, is not made to be exciting and hands-on, and therefore is not very effective. I think you can run training that is incredibly effective and is personalized to each person, and then changes what they're capable of, which is a very empowering experience that I think people generally love that I've encountered anyway.
So I have met people who just point blank say they don't want to learn. This is what I do. This is what I always want to do. I have no interest in learning any new skills. But I also think that that's what they say. And if you can just dangle the carrot a little bit, or do it in those bite-sized things, or show them something. You know, we talk a lot about like change, and somebody learning new skills is change. People are either moving away from something or moving towards something, right? And if you just tell them they're going on a training thing, or I need you to learn this new, you know, we're all going to start using Golang, and I need you to learn it. Then what are they moving? There were no reason to move away from it, and there's no reason to move towards it. So it's how you pitch it probably into that as well. One of the things I like the way you're describing as far as what you're doing as well is that it's only little pieces and little snippets, and it can be the little, well, just try it for a little bit, you know, and that might be hopefully just enough to kind of spark someone's interest and spark someone's curiosity, because once you've got that curiosity, then you can get over it. But yeah, I think whether you're talking organizational change or personal motivation or anything else, people either need a real impetus and a reason to leave they leave their comfort zone, or something to run towards. And I think what you're trying to do is to paint them a really shiny picture of something to move towards.
And also make it fun and exciting. I mean, ultimately, like, the decision to move to Golang is one that's made by our customers, by CTOs, by tech leaders. The decision to improve what the team can do is their decision as well.
Right.
Our job is to make that transition both easy and fun and empowering.
Yes. Okay. And on that awesome note, and it's a great, little sound bite to finish on. We are at past, so I am going to wrap it up. Just thank you very much, Hal, for chatting today. You can connect with us all afterwards with the links that are down there, and we will carry on the conversation in Slack if you are in that group. And other than that, I think if you are registered, then the video is usually available quite soon as well. You'll get a notification that it's there to rewatch. So if you missed any of the information or the things that Hal was talking about, you will find it in the playback as well. So I will end the call there. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Nice to join you. Thanks, Hal.
Thanks. Bye.